Very few topics in health and nutrition are as confusing or seemingly controversial as fish consumption. Is it healthy or important to consume fish? And what about fish oil supplements? Are they beneficial or dangerous for our health? And what are the best sources of omega-3 fats? These are just some of the questions that I will answer in this lecture, as well as tackling some common myths about fish. And this is a topic that I feel very passionate about, because too many people are not fully aware of how eating fish affects their health. And, as I repeat to my clients on a daily basis, the consequences of not being educated on this issue are extremely severe. So if you are concerned about your health and the health of your loved ones, especially if you have children and want to make sure they grow up healthy, pay close attention, because you're about to learn the truth about fish. Let's begin with facts. Over 80% of male fish are becoming female. That's right, male fish are developing female sexual organs and producing eggs. You may be wondering, where is this happening, why is this happening, and how does it affect your health? Where is it happening? It's happening everywhere. There's not a lake, not a stream, not an ocean, and not a sea that is immune to this problem. And it's been a well-researched and growing concern for over a decade. Let me give you a few examples. Popular Science magazine ran an article in 2009 that read, "Something in the water is feminizing our male fish. Are we next?" The article reported that all across the US, male fish were becoming intersex, and that their male sex organs were producing immature female eggs. And that according to a 9-year study at some sites, 91% of male largemouth bass were affected. Intersex males were found at the Columbia, Colorado, and Mississippi rivers. And in the southeastern US, intersex bass were found at every location sampled. National Geographic ran an article back in 2004 entitled "Male Fish Producing Eggs in Potomac River." The article explained how in June of 2002 fish were just dying around this river, and the fishermen were reporting that they were finding fish with lesions. And scientists determined that those lesions indicated exposure to bacteria and other contaminants. But the following year, scientists conducted a study to look for internal damage, and that's when they discovered the intersex condition. Male fish had both testicular and ovarian tissue. 42% of the male smallmouth bass showed signs of this deformity, and a second sampling a year later showed a higher rate, closer to 80%. Also, in 2004, NBC News interviewed researcher John Woodling regarding the discovery that male fish were developing female sexual organs in rivers all across the country. And John Woodling said, "I've done a lot of studies throughout my career which extends back to 1973. This is the first time that what I found scared me." And let me just quickly give you one more example from Canada. A 2010 headline read, "Fish feminizing in Alberta rivers." And again, in almost every population studied, male fish had elevated levels of a protein normally only found in females producing eggs. Scientists have raised the alarm, but is anybody listening? The few examples I just gave you are from Canada and the US, but the same issue has been well documented in all parts of the world. Now let's move on to why this is happening to our fish. The headlines tell the story. A National Geographic headline said, "Sex-changing chemicals can wipe out fish." And The Guardian had a headline that read, "Toxic stew of chemicals causing male fish to carry eggs and testes." So where do these chemicals that are contaminating our fish come from? I'll give you an easy way to remember a few of them. The 3 Ps. The first one is pills. This means pharmaceutical drugs. That's right, you don't need a prescription anymore to get pharmaceutical drugs. Nor do you need to ever pay for them. You can just get them for free from your water or from your fish. The way it works is pretty simple. As a society, we are taking a significantly higher amount of drugs than ever before. Our bodies release these drugs every time we urinate, and when we flush the toilet, the drugs end up in our water supply. So if you're drinking tap water or eating fish, then you are on blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, antidepressants, veterinary antibiotics and hormones, Viagra, and even on the birth control pill, whether you like it or not. And even though we have clear information on how this is damaging our environment and putting us all at risk, government is doing very little to regulate the pharmaceutical companies. And so there you have it. Our fish are on the pill. The next P is plastics. For example, the bisphenol A, known as BPA, phthalates, essentially all the crap that we throw away. Even when we place it in our recycling bins, it often gets dumped into our water supply anyway. It breaks down into smaller particles that fish accumulate in their system, and then it contaminates our food chain. The final P is pesticides, such as DDT, and all of the other problems associated with agricultural runoff, such as herbicides, insecticides, hormones. For example, if you look at rivers that are in close proximity to chickens and cattle, 100% of fish examined in those rivers turn out to be intersex, because the rain washes the waste concentrated in hormones excreted from these animals right into the water. We're not living in a fairy tale. When we pollute our soil and expand the meat and dairy industries to pollute even further, we are also destroying our water and our fish. And we can also talk about other persistent organic pollutants such as PCBs, dioxins, and fire retardants that are all affecting our fish, as well as thousands of new chemicals that industries are permitted to dump into our water supply each and every year. Even the toiletries that we're using, our antibacterial tissue paper, our deodorants, all ends up in the same place. Fish bioaccumulate these toxins in their fat tissues. Bigger fish eat smaller fish. In doing so, they just keep accumulating more and more of these chemicals. And then we, highly intelligent human beings, eat the big fatty fish because that's what we're told to do. And what's the impact on our health? Well, let's explain it in a simple way. Almost all of these chemicals that we dump into our water mimic estrogen. And so by ingesting and absorbing these chemicals, we are adding to the amount of natural hormones that we already have in our body. Endocrine disruptors, which is what all these chemicals are, have been linked to cancers, such as breast cancer, prostate, and even children cancers, reproductive problems, both male and female, such as lower sperm count, damaged egg cells, repeated miscarriages, early puberty, thyroid disease, cardiovascular disease, ADHD, neurological diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, diabetes, obesity, autism, and the list just goes on. But here is something interesting. Our pollution gets pushed to the Arctic regions of the world, so how the Arctic is doing is a good sign of how we're doing. And it turns out that in Arctic villages across Greenland, Canada, and Russia, a disproportionately high number of female births are occurring. And this issue is not isolated. The global gender balance of the human race seems to be changing. It's happening in Japan, in the US, in Latin America, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Wales, the Netherlands. Studies have shown changing sex ratios in Italian cities and among fish-eating women in the Great Lakes region. And a First Nation community that lives in one of Canada's most industrialized areas, in southwestern Ontario on the shores of the St. Clair River, say that they once had a kids' hockey team, but no longer, because there aren't enough boys. Surrounded by chemical plants, this is the first community in the world to have a birth rate of 2 girls to every boy. Fishermen are being advised to stop eating the fish they catch. So let's end this part of the lecture with the understanding that it's probably not a good idea to consume fish that have been mutated by toxins that we dumped into our water supply. But as you will find out a little later, the danger of consuming fish and seafood is not just about all of these chemicals. There are other reasons not to consume fish. In fact, there are 2 main reasons that the general public is unaware of. And I will get to them. But before I do, let's just talk about one more toxin. It's one that most people are already aware of: methylmercury. The consumption of fish and shellfish is by far the biggest cause of the rising concentration of mercury in humans. A 2012 report from Global News Canada highlighted a few facts. First one being that mercury is now deemed to be more dangerous than previously thought, that the current safety levels are outdated, and that the fish that people eat today have mercury concentrations that exceed safety levels that were considered safe just a few years ago. And the word safe is under quotation marks because there is no amount of mercury that is safe. When ingested, methylmercury is almost 100% absorbed by your gastrointestinal tract and distributed to all tissues. This form of mercury that we get from fish easily crosses the blood-brain barrier as well as the placenta, affecting a baby's growing brain and nervous system. Even a moderate consumption of commonly eaten fish can quickly put you at risk. Some people are aware of the dangers of mercury in fish, but they believe they can somehow choose fish that is lower in mercury and that this somehow protects them. However, all fish are contaminated with mercury, and there is no way, even for an informed consumer, to know exactly how much mercury is in the fish or shellfish they are eating. Mercury is a highly toxic substance that attacks our central nervous system, that can cause lifelong disability, as well as death in extreme cases. Children are especially at risk of the harms of mercury because they are still developing. And of course, infants can be exposed through their mother's breast milk. When it comes to mercury, there is no safe level of exposure. Mercury has also been linked to acute and chronic effects on the cardiovascular system. It accumulates in the heart as well as other tissues, increases blood pressure, is associated with irregular and increased heart rate, and at least 12 scientific studies have associated mercury with increased rates of death from cardiovascular diseases. And adding to the danger is the fact that mercury is very slowly eliminated from the body. So it is easy for us to accumulate this toxin at very high levels. In other words, if you had fish several months ago, the mercury from that fish is still in your body. Now imagine if you have fish on a weekly basis. And we know from animal studies that methylmercury can have delayed effects that we may discover as we get older. But we human beings are not the only victims. The scientific journal Nature reported that Arctic foxes are suffering from a seafood diet and experiencing a population crash due to the high levels of mercury accumulating in their bodies. Now, despite all of these facts, people still like to argue about the benefits of consuming fish. So now let's introduce the first argument that people make for eating fish. We are told that fish provide us with essential fats, the omega-3s. And so some miseducated and easily manipulated individuals will make the argument that even though fish carry with them in their tissues a lot of toxins, the benefits of consuming them still outweigh the risks. Why? Because of the benefits of omega-3s, the essential fats. But there are a few problems with this logic. The first one is that fish do not actually produce any omega-3 fatty acids. What they do is they consume algae, microalgae, that is rich in omega-3s as well as other beneficial nutrients such as iodine and selenium, and by consuming this marine algae, fish accumulate omega-3s in their tissues. That's why we are told to consume fatty fish, because the fattier the fish, the more omega-3 it's accumulated from consuming microalgae. And fatty fish have also accumulated more of the toxins we just finished talking about. And so what do I recommend that my clients consume? Microalgae, such as blue-green algae and green algae. These are the real sources of omega-3s. And in addition to that, they also help remove heavy metals from your body. You are going straight to the primary source, cutting out the nasty middleman. But what other foods are also high in omega-3s without having the devastating effects of fish? Chia seeds. Chia seeds are so high in omega-3s that they are added to chicken feed to produce eggs that are high in omega-3s. And feeding chia seeds to chickens also means that the meat of these chickens becomes enriched with omega-3s. And when chia seeds are fed to cattle, it enriches milk with omega-3s. So it's up to you. You can choose to filter your nutrients through the intestines of an animal, such as a fish or chicken or a cow, which is almost like running your nutrients through a sewage system before consuming them, or you can go straight to the source and consume the real first-generation essential fats that come from plant-based foods such as microalgae, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, and leafy greens such as spinach, all of which are rich in omega-3s, as well as containing a huge amount of antioxidants. And I will talk more about plant-based versus fish omega-3s near the end of the lecture, because I know that some of you still have some questions about that, and we'll get to them eventually. Now, a little earlier, I suggested that beyond the fact that virtually all fish in all of our waters carry a dangerous amount of pollutants, even if these pollutants did not exist, fish would still be unhealthy to consume. And there are two main reasons for this. Reason one, it's just bad nutrition. All animal-based food contain high levels of saturated fat, cholesterol, zero fiber, and zero antioxidants, unless the animal ingested some plants before being killed. And fish are no different, except for the little bit of omega-3s. But wait a second, you thought that the fat in fish was all omega-3s? Is that what you thought? Absolutely not. In fact, 70 to 85% of the fat in fish is not omega-3s. Just like chicken fat and beef fat, fish fats are a mix of different types of fat. And a huge chunk of fish fat is saturated, just like the stuff you are trying to avoid by eating less red meat. Furthermore, many types of fish that we eat have higher amounts of total fat than beef or chicken. Chinook salmon, for example, is over 50% pure fat, and 1/3 of that fat is saturated. Fish meat is not heart healthy. And some people will ask me about shrimp. Well, 3 ounces of shrimp contain 161 milligrams of cholesterol, compared to 88 milligrams in bass and 79 milligrams in a beefsteak. So bottom line, consuming fish will increase your animal protein intake, which is associated to many health risks. For example, eating fish will elevate your IGF-1 levels, just like eating any other type of meat. And a high IGF-1 level is linked to cancer. So we need to stop thinking that consuming fish is much different than consuming any other animal, except perhaps for the fact that they accumulate more toxins in their tissues. But what about all these populations on Earth that eat lots of fish and are very healthy? That's a myth, and I'll address it in a moment. But first, remember, we are imagining that the world is perfect, that our oceans, rivers, lakes, and streams are not polluted with pharmaceutical drugs, plastics, DDTs, PCBs, dioxins, heavy metals, etc., and that our fish do not have any toxins in their tissues. And I'm reminding you that even if we live in this fantasy, there are still 2 reasons why fish should not be regarded as health food. The first reason is that from a nutritional standpoint, they are not much different than any other animal protein, something that we already consume too much of. And now, I'm about to tell you the second reason. The second reason that it is harmful to consume fish is because of their oil. The omega-3 fish oil that we rave about is actually rancid. When you talk about fish oil, you have to talk about lipid peroxidation. Now I know that most people have heard about fish oil, and many of us even buy fish oil supplements. We've all bought into the hype. But yet many people haven't heard about lipid peroxidation. Essentially, what this means is that fish oil, which is polyunsaturated fat, is extremely unstable. It goes rancid very quickly, creating harmful lipid peroxides. One lab tested the top fish oil brands and found that every single sample contained lipid peroxides. Let's explain this in a simple way. Cold water fish, the type we are most often told to consume, live in temperatures that are really cold. They use their fat as an antifreeze. But as soon as you remove the fish from the water and expose them to air and warmer temperatures, their oil spontaneously becomes rancid. This also happens when the oil comes in contact with the oxygen inside of your body. And what most people don't realize is that fish do not have what we normally consider to be a fishy smell or taste. That fish smell, that disgusting smell that we are familiar with, is the smell of oxidized, rancid oil. That's why fish oil producers try to disguise the smell and to prevent the damage by adding antioxidants, such as vitamin E, and preservatives. And then they use gel capsules to block the smell, but it doesn't work. Open the gel capsule and you will get a sniff of rancid oil. Rancid fish oil can cause damage to every part of your cells, increasing inflammation in the body. In fact, marine oils, fish oils, are more inflammatory than even trans fats. And inflammation has been strongly linked to many degenerative diseases, such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, and even premature aging. One of the top cancer researchers in the world, Robert Weinberg of MIT, revised his leading textbook, The Biology of Cancer, to explain the connection between inflammation and cancer. And since 2007, researchers have acknowledged that the prime cause of cancer is inflammation, not genetics. Rancid fish oil has also been shown to damage or oxidize cholesterol. And today, cardiologists know that oxidized cholesterol is what causes the inflammation that leads to cardiovascular disease. And for those of you that listen to the latest marketing and think that krill oil is any better, it's just as harmful, if not worse. Do not pull this creature out of the water, squeeze out its oil, and consume it. It's not healthy. And it's funny how every few years they'll come out with some new product just to keep your attention. Fish oil, krill oil, snake oil. It's just wonderful marketing, but very dangerous for people who are not aware. Okay, so you've made it this far in the lecture and you understand all the facts so far, but you still have one problem that you need to resolve. How can fish and fish oil be so bad when all you hear is how healthy and important they are for us? Well, again, that's just industry marketing and manipulation. For example, the Journal of Lipids published an article by Professor Brian Peskin entitled Why Fish Oils Fail, a comprehensive 21st century lipids-based physiologic analysis. This is a wonderful and well-researched article written by a scientist that specializes in essential fatty acids. He dives into the history of misleading information, explaining how pre-2007 studies on fish oil were poorly conducted and inconsistent with the science. He stresses this point again by saying that an enormous number of poorly conducted studies in the journals have conclusions that cannot be relied on and are misleading physicians and researchers worldwide. Professor Peskin goes on to say that so-called fish oil successes were highlighted and its failures downplayed and underpublicized. However, post-2007 studies of fish oil show significant accumulated failure. It seems like it's getting more difficult to hide the truth. Now, here's an example of a 2013 study conducted by the Risk and Prevention Study Collaborative Group in Italy. The key finding was that fish oil failed in all measures of cardiovascular disease prevention, both primary and secondary, and the study was so conclusive that a new directive was issued to cardiovascular patients to stop taking fish oil. Another study published in the Journal of the National Cancer Institute confirmed an increased risk in prostate cancer for men taking fish oil. And another trial showed that macular degeneration victims were not helped by fish oil. And these are just 3 examples, all from 2013. And as Professor Peskin points out in his comprehensive review, when you look at our physiology, knowing what we know about fish oil and what it does to our body, there should never have been any expectation for success. Now I can go on and on listing recent studies showing fish oil failures, such as a study they did in Australia where medical researchers looked at 2,400 pregnant women before concluding that fish oil supplements do not benefit pregnant women. Or a 2010 study where researchers looked at 400 men and women in their mid-70s, one group received fish oil, the other a placebo, and the conclusion was that fish oil failed to slow mental decline. Now, I'm not going to go through all the studies, but I will say that the more you look at the bulk of the evidence, the more you learn that most, if not all, of the studies that attempted to show the benefits of fish oil were funded and marketed by none other than the fish industry itself. And studies showing the failure and dangers of fish oil tend to be of much better design, more scientific, and largely unreported, because there is no money to be made with that information. The public, including doctors and health professionals, are largely unaware of the conflicts of interest that affect what we are told about fish. Let me give you an example. Here you see the title of a press release from Oceana.org. Conflicts of interest taint Institute of Medicine seafood panel examining mercury risks. In 2006, the IOM, Institute of Medicine, was commissioned to assess the risks and benefits of eating seafood. So they put together a panel of 13 people. But 12 out of the 13 people on this panel were representatives of the fish industry. and the 13th member had worked on projects funded by Monsanto and the Canadian Drug Manufacturers Association. The director of the Mercury Policy Project said there was no legitimate consumer representative on the advisory panel, and that the deck was stacked against consumer interests right from the beginning. In similar situations in the past, the process has been twisted to provide the outcome the seafood industry wants so they can sell more seafood. While we sincerely hope that this has not happened, we are not encouraged by the makeup of this panel. An organization such as the Center for Science in the Public Interest, CSPI, pointed out that the panel were biased toward the nutritional benefits of fish. In fact, only one of the 13 members, Dr. Bellinger, was a recognized practitioner in the field of mercury toxicity, and he had just written a report that was funded by the US tuna industry. And this report clearly showed that women and children are in danger of mercury-contaminated fish. Yet Dr. Bellinger ignored the findings of his own report to suggest in the end that avoiding fish could do more harm than good. According to the CSPI, Bellinger's conflict of interest with the fish industry violated any reasonable interpretation of the National Academy of Science Institute of Medicine's conflict of interest rules. So if you didn't know already, all the wonderful advice that we get about the importance of consuming fish is paid for by the fish industry. It's just marketing and business as usual. And I urge health professionals, specifically doctors and dietitians, to gain more awareness about these issues before offering advice to clients and patients. Okay, now that we put an end to the fish oil myth, I want to end by clearing up a few more common myths that too many people still believe about fish, highlighting why sometimes bad information is very dangerous. Myth number 1. Populations that consume the most fish are healthy. Obviously, this is false. But for anybody that is still in doubt, let's double check. And we'll begin in Finland. People in Finland are known to consume lots of fish. Let's look at a study. The title is Intake of Mercury from Fish, Lipid Peroxidation, and the Risk of Myocardial Infarction and Coronary Cardiovascular and Any Death in Eastern Finnish Men. And the authors begin by saying that even though previous studies have suggested an association between high fish intake and reduced coronary heart disease mortality, men in eastern Finland who have a high fish intake have an exceptionally high coronary heart disease mortality. They go on to state that even though men in eastern Finland consume a lot of fish, their mortality from coronary heart disease is one of the highest in the world. The study concluded that intake of fish and the accumulation of mercury in the body are associated with an increased risk of acute myocardial infarction, as well as death from coronary heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and any cause in Eastern Finnish men, and this increased risk may be due to the promotion of lipid peroxidation by mercury. Now, I also want to add one last thing. Finland and Iceland are some of the biggest consumers of fish in the world. Finland ranks number 1 in the world in deaths from Alzheimer's, and Iceland ranks number 2 in Alzheimer's. Now, I'm not saying it's just the fish causing this. What I am saying is that it's not surprising based on what we know about the dangers of fish consumption. Now, let's move on to the Inuit. So many people still believe the myth that Arctic natives do not suffer from heart disease, and so a diet rich in fish and blubber must be better than a plant-based diet. This myth began in the 1970s due to some studies in Greenland. But, as researchers from the University of Ottawa Heart Institute explained recently, those studies 40 years ago were based on inaccurate and unreliable hospital records. The actual people were not studied directly. It turns out that heart disease is as common or even more so among northern populations as it is for other populations, and life expectancy overall is about a decade less among native communities. A diet of fish and blubber does not enhance our health. The only diet known to prevent and reverse disease is a plant-based diet. And unfortunately, the northern natives do not have access to such healthful foods. Now let's move on to myth number 2. Farmed fish is healthier than wild fish. Nothing could be further from the truth. Dr. Bruce Monger teaches an oceanography class at Cornell University, and he says that if anybody was contemplating whether to choose plant-based or animal-based food, they should visit a fish pen and see the horrid, cramped, disease-ridden environment. Farm fish contain many more contaminants. A 2003 report from the Environmental Working Group showed that farmed salmon in the US has the highest level of PCBs. And part of the reason is because they are fed processed pellets made from other polluted fish. And they are even given fish oil, rancid fish oil. And because they are more prone to disease that can spread very quickly, they are given antibiotics to prevent the whole group from becoming ill. Also, because farmed salmon do not have the pink color we are accustomed to seeing, the food pellets they are fed contain color additives. And then there's the environmental impact. Parasites and diseases from fish farms can spread to wild fish, and another issue is that millions of these farm fish escape to the wild, and this can have devastating effects. Also, another environmental concern is the amount of food required. For example, it takes 3 pounds of wild fish to grow 1 pound of farmed salmon. This is extremely inefficient. It's not sustainable. And it contributes to the destruction of our oceans. Okay, it's time for myth number 3. Fish omega-3 fatty acids are better than plant-based. Okay, we already covered this myth earlier. If you remember, there is no such thing as fish omega-3s. Since fish do not produce omega-3s, they consume it from marine algae and store it. They are just the middleman. Now let's do a quick nutrition lesson. Omega-3 fatty acids are essential for good health. There is no debating this fact. There are 3 types of omega-3s. ALA, which is found in plant-based foods, EPA and DHA, which are both found in marine algae, and of course in the fish that consume the algae. Now, ALA is the only omega-3 fatty acid that is an essential nutrient. This means that our body cannot make it, and therefore we need to consume it from food. And when we consume ALA, our body converts some of it to EPA and DHA. Now, contrary to what the seafood industry will have you believe, our body has a great built-in mechanism that tells it how much ALA to convert to EPA and DHA. So you just need to make sure that you're eating a healthy, unprocessed, plant-based diet to get all the ALA you need and to allow your body to convert what it needs to the other forms of omega-3s, the EPA and DHA. But when you take fish oil supplements, for example, you are overdosing on EPA and DHA because you are taking greater amounts of these omega-3s than your body would ever naturally produce or absorb. And this is harmful. And to put an end to the myth that people that don't eat fish need omega-3 supplements, studies have shown that vegetarians and vegans have similar amounts of DHA and EPA than heavy fish eaters. So, fish industry, you're going to have to come up with some other reason to convince people to consume rancid, contaminated fish and fish oil. And I should mention that when you consume the best and more stable sources of omega-3s, such as blue-green algae, green algae, sunflower microgreens, chia seeds, hemp seeds, spinach, walnuts, and so forth, you are consuming foods that are incredibly rich in many beneficial nutrients. These are foods that have been shown time and time again to support the human body and prevent disease in many ways. And they don't have the cholesterol and other problems that animal-based food has. Now we've come to myth number 4. You're getting the fish you ordered. I'm sorry, this one is false too. According to new reports, there is a high probability that the fish and seafood on your plate is not what it's labeled to be. For example, 87% of fish sold as snapper is mislabeled, and 59% of fish sold as tuna is mislabeled. The Oceana study, released in 2013, tells us that it's next to impossible to know what is on your plate. But if you want to know the truth, here it is. White tuna is more often escolar, which is known as the X-lax fish. because it's known to cause gastrointestinal issues. And premium red snapper is almost never red snapper. Both red snapper and halibut are often swapped with tilefish, which is one of the more contaminated species that pregnant women are told to never eat. And the reason this is happening is because of overfishing. Entire species of fish are being wiped out. A 2006 report released data that 90% of fish and other ocean life have been wiped out, and that we can expect to see a complete collapse of world fish populations by 2048. The fishing industry's drive for profit is destroying our oceans, and commercial fishing practices are so destructive. For example, bottom trawling is a fishing method used where large weighted nets are dragged across the ocean floor, and at the surface, they throw out 70% of what's been dragged up. Imagine destroying 70% just to grab 30% of the fish you are actually looking for. Bottom trawling is known as the most destructive of any actions that humans conduct in the ocean, Dr. Watling tells us, and most of it happens in deep waters out of sight. Here is a before photo of a seafloor, and here's the after effect. We're just destroying the marine ecosystem in so many ways, and then we cast nets in the ocean that are miles long and go down right to the bottom, and everything gets caught in these nets. The bycatch, and when we say bycatch we mean unintentionally caught fish, includes turtles, sea lions, seabirds, sharks, dolphins, whales. 308,000 dolphins and whales die each year due to these nets. We are on the path to destruction, just because we want to consume seafood such as shrimp. I use shrimp as an example because for every pound of shrimp caught, 4 or more pounds of unwanted creatures die. And for what? This is not sustainable. And destroying our ocean's ecosystem means destroying humanity. This is yet another reason why you may not want to consume seafood. And let me end like this. In all of my research and all the recommendations that I offer my clients in order to help them improve their personal health and well-being, it seems that every step we can take to improve our personal health is also compatible with improving the health of our planet. And perhaps that's because we are connected to all life on this earth. We are especially connected to our oceans, without which we cannot survive. Is it a coincidence that about 70% of the human body is made up of water? And 70% of Earth is covered with water, creating an environment that sustains plants, animals, and us humans. Destroying fish means destroying the ocean. And without the ocean, there is no water and no oxygen. So we are connected. And with this final fact, I thank you for watching.